Brilliant. Okay, so if you're joining us live, then please feel free to add your questions to the chat. Rue and I thought we'd kind of talk through kind of our experiences and kind of things that we wish we'd known about teaching abroad before we actually did it. But that'll just be a few short slides, and then we were going to give people time for question and answer. So please, as I said, just add questions to the chat as they come into your head, basically. If there's anything specific that you've come for today, please put that in the chat as well. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what the session will involve today, we're going to talk about who can teach abroad first of all, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why we both chose to teach abroad, and then we're going to talk about kind of the procedural aspects, so how to find a school and when to apply, and then, as I said before, we've got time for Q&A as well. So who can teach abroad? We had a really good chat about this, didn't we, really, when we were putting this together? It's quite interesting because teaching abroad, when we say teaching abroad, I think in this webinar we're specifically talking about teaching in international schools, because there's lots of different ways that you can work abroad as a teacher. So, for example, you could teach English as an additional language in kind of adult colleges and that sort of thing. But our experience is very much in international schools, so that's schools where English is the main language, or the kind of the first language that people communicate in, and often they will use a British curriculum, so which is based on the national curriculum that we're used to. So that's kind of the kind of setting that we're thinking about primarily today. Rue, did you want to talk us through kind of the difference between the curriculums that you might find in international schools?
Yeah, so there are lots of different routes into teaching abroad, and as Jen said, we're going to look at primarily at the international school sector, but the international school sector also has its differences within it as well. So when you're actually looking for jobs, it's really useful to have a look at the curriculum that the school teaches, which is really clearly articulated on all school websites. So there's a group of schools, a large group of schools that use the British curriculum. And by that, they call it the British curriculum, but they mean the English curriculum. So rather than Scottish and Wales and Irish, Northern Irish curriculum. So what you look for in terms of those, when you're looking for schools, there are schools which are kind of verified schools for teaching an English curriculum. And those schools tend to sign up to something called COBIS, which is the Council of British International Schools. And one source, as we'll talk about later, of job adverts when you're looking for the right school for you is to look on COBIS, who actually use TES International as like their basis for advertising schools. But they do that through their own website, so you can kind of know that you're going to a school that has a really familiar curriculum that you can speak to in your application, but also that you'll be familiar with when you're over there. Some schools, and I would say in my experience, most schools that are teaching the English curriculum actually have a lot of freedom in what they do with that curriculum. So whilst a lot of schools take the curriculum as a basis, they will often expand on that. And many schools won't do SATs, for example, because it's not relevant for children's progression to the international schools in terms of the secondary schools that they'll attend. So have a look at those kind of things when you're looking. The other context that you might come across is international schools that are not called British schools abroad. They're called international schools, and they often use the primary years programme. So this is a programme that breaks down the international baccalaureate into the middle years programme and the primary years programme. And there's an early years programme as well. So in the primary years programme, it's completely different to the English curriculum. It is an inquiry-based approach, not kind of thinking of inquiry in terms of topics, but very much child-led inquiry-based approach. So it's very, very different. And sometimes those schools might be looking for you to have experience in PYP. So it's just kind of looking at the job advert and seeing, are they willing to put the effort in to train you up in PYP, because it's a very different approach, or are they looking for experience? And finally, there's another curriculum that tends to be very popular called the Cambridge Primary Programme, which is a model of the English curriculum, but has some core differences. So have a look around that and have a look on the Cambridge Primary Programme website as well.
Another kind of aspect to consider is where you are in your profession, where you are in your professional development as well. So I know lots of people around the table will be kind of qualifying this year and then be going into their ECT induction years in September. And again, now that we have the ECT induction programme, it's unlikely that you'll find an international school that will kind of support you through that. And that's for two reasons. One, obviously, that induction programme takes investment, and it might be that international schools aren't wanting to kind of put that investment in at this stage. But also, most international schools, even before the ECT induction programme, always required teachers to have a couple of years experience as a minimum. So when I was looking for jobs in an international school, most of the adverts I saw would say things like at least 2 years experience, at least 4 years experience in some cases. So international schools do tend to want you to have had some experience of teaching as a paid teacher before you then apply to them. And then some jobs as well will also require you to have a European passport as well. That was one of the requirements of the school that I taught in. Is there anything else around passport considerations, Rue?
Yeah, just thinking about some of the schools in Europe, especially schools in Italy and Spain at the moment, are actually requiring you to have a European rather than a British passport. So post-Brexit, a lot of schools are choosing not to go down the route of paying for visas. So looking for teachers that already have a European passport. So it's thinking about, which passport do you have, and checking the job advert to make sure that they accept applicants who have a British passport rather than a European one.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's have a chat then about kind of why we did it in the first place and our experiences. So this is a picture of the so I taught abroad for 1 year, and I taught in a school in Bangkok in Thailand, and this is a picture of the school that you can see, and that's Bromsgrove International School. So we were affiliated with Bromsgrove School in the UK, which is in the Midlands, and we were kind of the Thai kind of basis for we were that school in Thailand. So we had connections with that school, but we weren't kind of we had a lot of autonomy over how we wanted to run our school as well. In terms of our classrooms, we had really lovely classrooms. They weren't as kind of they probably weren't as well resourced as I had been used to in England, but we had everything that we needed. It was just a case sometimes of kind of working out, well, if I want to do that particular activity, which resources are available to me, and how can sometimes I needed to adapt things to make things work. But the facilities that we had in the school were absolutely amazing. So you can see there's a picture there of our auditorium, which was basically our school hall, and that was our primary production of Aladdin. And it was absolutely fantastic, the kind of opportunities we were able to give the children in terms of performance and drama and theatre. Equally, they had amazing sporting opportunities. So there were lots of opportunities for kind of competing with other international schools and taking part in tournaments. And you can see there as well, that's a picture of it was called the primary atrium, and it was like the indoor play area for the children. They had the outdoor play area as well, and then they could kind of come and go as they pleased at lunchtime. It was a through school, so our youngest children were 2 years old, and the oldest students we went up to A level, so year 13, and that meant that I had my year threes walking through school at lunchtime alongside these really tall teenagers, and that was a little bit kind of that was a strange thing to see at first, something I wasn't used to back in the UK. But that through school, it was really lovely because you kind of there was a strong sense of identity as a school, and every student had that strong sense of identity about we belong to Bromsgrove. In terms of a primary identity for our primary children, it was a little bit trickier. So things like year 6 weren't the oldest children in the school anymore, so they didn't always get automatically get that year 6 responsibility that you see in most primary schools in the UK. So we had to do things like we brought in like a head boy and a head girl for primary, so we mirrored what secondary were doing to try and draw that distinction between primary and secondary. Another thing we did was we didn't have like a leavers assembly at the end of the year for year 6. We had a stepping up assembly because the idea was they were going on to year 7 and they wouldn't leave our school, they'd carry on in year 7. So just, you know, changes. There were slight differences. The through school aspect kind of gave us those changes. Obviously, being in Thailand, there were really different cultural aspects to the school practice as well, to the school day, not so much to the pedagogy, but kind of to how the day and how the year worked. So, for example, we started every morning with everyone standing silently, listening to the Thai national anthem as it was played throughout the school and the flag was raised. And that signalled the start of the day. And no matter where you were in the school, you had to stand still and then welcome the children in. The language was obviously a very different. Was obviously very different. There's no overlap between Thai and English languages in terms of their roots. So it was a whole new language to get our heads around for those of us who are from Britain. And lots of the children spoke Thai or Mandarin as their home language, and then they were expected to teach to learn in English. So we were quite reliant often on our teaching assistants, who tended to be Thai nationals, and they would often they wouldn't translate necessarily kind of key aspects of learning, but if we were having a conversation about something that was particularly conceptual, like I was trying to explain what the school council would do once to my primary kids, and I needed my Thai teaching assistant then to explain what a school council was so that they could understand. Another thing that made this school quite different to my experience in the UK was that it was a boarding school. So lots of the children were boarders. We had I think it was about a third of the children were boarders and 2/3 of the children would go home at the end of the day. Even then, the children that were going home, all of them would be driven. There weren't any children walking. So it wasn't the type of school where you'd walk, you know, down the road, and it would be people from the local area that were at that school. Everybody was in 4x4s and minibuses and things like that. But some children were boarders. And that was quite tricky because kind of, you know, you'd start the working day, the Thai national anthem would play, and you'd be meeting children that had kind of been around others since about 7 o'clock, 6:30 that morning. And they didn't, you know, so they didn't often get lots of downtime. They were always in a big group of children. So that was kind of managing their well-being was different to managing the well-being of children that would go home every night. And also Friday evening or Friday afternoon home time was really special because that's when everybody, or mostly everybody, got to go home to their families. And then also, with it being a boarding school, it was a fee-paying school as well. So the parents were essentially funding the school. And so the parents' role was it was more like a customer, much more like a customer than it is in the UK. So we had to, there was much more collegiate work with the parents than I was used to in the UK. And kind of decisions about the school were made, the opinion of the parents or the kind of views of the parents were kind of one of the driving factors in kind of you know, decisions that were made about the school. So that's the school. Those are some of the kind of the particularities of the school. I mentioned as well, like the kind of the school year, with it being such a big school, with it being a through school, there were lots of events that happened, but the way things were organised were often more like a secondary school rather than a primary school. So I probably had more autonomy over what I taught and what the curriculum would look like, because I was involved in the curriculum development of the school. But I had less autonomy over kind of the educational visits and the school trips and the events and things that we were part of. So you can see there's a picture of, the first picture is of the school fun run that happens every year. And that was organised by the PE department for secondary and for primary. And obviously we, as primary, it was organised for secondary first, and then it was adapted for primary. And there were lots of events like that were, you know, it was decided they were happening, and then how do we adapt it for primary, and then we had to fit in with that. Similarly, we've got on the right, there's the Christmas fair, which was again, I wasn't entirely sure if we'd be celebrating Christmas with us being in Thailand, but we did. You can see we've got a Christmas tree in the middle of our auditorium, and sorry, in the middle of our atrium. And again, it was arranged for secondary, so the secondary students put on all these stalls, and then it was, okay, how will it be adapted for primary? And it ended up being a safeguarding nightmare because some parents came, some parents didn't come, children were walking around independently. So again, it was just that kind of working out how to fit in. There were some fantastic events as well. Like, all of these events were really, really enjoyable as well. So the bottom right hand corner, we've got that's me and my class celebrating Loy Krathong, which is the Thai water festival, and it happens around the end of November, beginning of December. And the Thai department in the school organises for all the staff to wear traditional Thai dress, and everyone's, you know, wearing traditional ceremonial clothes, and it was an absolutely amazing day. And then as well, you can see on the bottom left, that was the sleepover that I had to organise for my class. And again, that was just something that happens every year. Year 3 and year 4 have a sleepover. Oh, and by the way, you're organising it, kind of thing. So, and it was also a little bit of an advert for boarding, to kind of, you know, maybe some of these children would like to be boarders later on as well. So there's all these, like, you know, different lenses that you end up looking at the events through that you don't necessarily get back in the UK. One other thing was that the constants, the constant people in that school were the Thai staff and the parents and the students. The international teachers, you know, so the British expats and people like that, would change quite regularly. So again, there was very much, you know, you were fitting in with the Thai culture, but you were also fitting in with this school. And although the teachers were kind of had high status, there was also this feeling of needing to fit in with the school as well, because, you know, it's the children's education that's at stake, and the parents, you know, care very deeply about it. So it's this, you know, it's a really interesting balance between fitting in, but then also, you know, being able to make a difference and kind of lead in certain areas as well. And then finally, as well as having, you know, as well as the school being kind of such a different experience, life was a different experience as well. So there were loads in Southeast Asia. There were loads of opportunities for traveling. So I travelled around different parts of Thailand, and then I also travelled around different parts of Asia as well. So I got to go to Hong Kong. I got to go to Malaysia. It was absolutely fantastic. Having said that, on the weekends where, you know, we arranged to travel and kind of you know, go on adventures, those weekends were absolutely brilliant and really exciting. And things like, you know, like the half-term holidays, you could do stuff like that as well. But then the weekends where those things weren't happening, you know, and everyday life kind of continued, I suppose things were a bit quieter, because you might have formed quite close friendships with people, but you didn't have, like, necessarily the deep kind of, the, you know, the long-term friendships that you would have had back at home, possibly, or the family connections that you'd have back at home. So it was this weird balance again between really, really exciting, but then very quiet everyday life as well. And, you know, in the evenings, there were lots of opportunities to go out with people and kind of, you know, have really nice evenings and social evenings. But those social times, it was it wasn't the same as kind of, you know, the best friends that you have for life. It was lovely people to spend time with at that point, who were, you know, in a similar boat to you, having, you know, moved abroad for the first time and teaching in the same school as you and things. That top right hand picture there, that was my view from my bedroom. I got really lucky with the flat that I ended up living in, and that was one of, you know, that view is imprinted in my memory, because it's like the sky. I don't think you can quite see it there, but it is, you can see the skyline of Bangkok. And then this picture, the picture just below it, that was our local, so the Red Onion pub, and that's where we spend quite a few evenings. So yeah, that's my kind of a very brief summary of my experience, and so I'll pass over to Rue to talk about hers.
That's so lovely, Jen. It's really nice to hear about different people's experiences. I have a lot of what you've said actually resonates with my experience as well, actually. So I won't kind of repeat anything that you've gone over, and I'll just try and kind of pick out some of the nuances of the two experiences that I'd like to talk about today. So and that's in the British School in Milan in Italy and the British School in Tokyo in Japan. It's interesting actually that when you go to work abroad, you'll encounter some people who have gone to the school and intended to stay for 2 years and ended up staying for 20 and get married there and have children, and they just love it so much. And you'll experience others that spend a couple of years, because contracts tend to be between 2 or 3 years initially, so you have to commit to being there for 2 or 3 years because of the investment that the school makes in bringing you over to the country, which we'll talk about later in terms of packages that are available. And you'll meet some people who go for 2 or 3 years and then go home and teach in England again and take that experience and the cultural experience back with them. But my experience was that, talking about turnover, that the kind of, you know, the expat community would be quite fluid. And in teachers, there is a tendency that you would be in a place for 2 or 3 years and then perhaps go to a different place and a different place. And it's almost like once you're in the international school system, it's quite easy to move between opportunities, especially if you're in a school group like the Bromsgrove group. There's lots of different school groups that you can look at, where schools in England, usually independent schools, have invested in schooling abroad, and it follows their model of the curriculum abroad, such as Harrow and the Eton House group and all of this. So you can look at travelling within those opportunities. And when I had worked in the British School in Milan, I didn't go directly to Tokyo, but it was actually someone who I became friends with in Milan who said, oh, I used to work at the British School in Tokyo and I really loved it. And so when an opportunity came up there a couple of years later, after working in London for a while, I was really interested in that. So you kind of get to know the world a little bit. Shall I go ding when to move on?
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Next slide, please.
Like one of those old school storybooks. Okay. So this is Japan. So this is my experience of teaching abroad. So it's not too dissimilar, even though you're in Tokyo, it's not too dissimilar classroom-wise to the classroom experience in the UK. So a lot of my classroom experience in the UK, I took resources with me, and a lot of the displays and the topics and things were very similar because I was teaching in a British school. However, there was a lot of flexibility around the curriculum, particularly around your pedagogical approach. So there was flexibility, for example, in terms of, there was some lovely research around high performance learning at the time that was gaining a lot of traction in education. And so we could implement that as a whole school. So this was a large school, 3 to 18, and there were lots and lots of opportunities for professional development. So in terms of high performance learning, the whole school put on different training events, different sharing experiences. There was not a carousel, more like a conference organised for the teachers on a training day to share experiences of teaching through this high performance learning approach once we'd had a go at it. And it was really great because some of the teachers who were teaching A levels were sharing similar pedagogical approaches with early years teachers. And then they were getting together to think about, well, what can we do differently? And how can we move our practice forward? And one of the things that really will stick in my memory is someone teaching A-level science. They were teaching about nuclear power stations. That they actually said, do you know, I spoke to the early years team at this conference, and they talked about box modelling and how they think with children and talk with children through box modelling. So I got my A-level students to box model a nuclear power station. And he said, I have never had 100% of my students achieve in these like mid-module tests and you know, achieve full marks. And he said every single pupil in my class achieved full marks, and had this success story of how he'd used early years kind of approaches to learning with A-level students with really great success. And then so the ability to work with colleagues and extend your own professional practice in these large through schools is just phenomenal. And that's something that I would definitely take forwards. The thing that I really loved as well is that I was assistant head in Tokyo. So I had like sort of a reduced teaching commitment so that I could help out with residentials and trips, which were very regular. So part of the international school experiences, you'll find that trips and residentials and that cultural enrichment is really a focus. because you've got children who are often transient in terms of they are living neither in their native country and nor in their native language, but also they're living in this kind of host culture where they'll stay in a country for a couple of years and then maybe move again as their parents move for work. So that's the experience that I found. And at one point we had 53 different nationalities in our school. And so we needed to offer our students chance to connect with the local culture and to learn about Japan and learn about each other in spaces that were not the classroom. So this is usually done through lots and lots of residentials and trips. And this is just a photo of one of the residentials that we took to Mount Fuji, because Kaguchiko was just up the road, about half an hour's 45-minute drive away. And we woke up in the morning and we did yoga looking at Fuji. So, it's that kind of thing. And then doing art as well. So they're looking through their viewfinders to sketch parts of Fuji. So the residentials and the trips can be quite exciting. Picking up on Jen's point about you are in a space where you might not be native speakers or speakers at all of the language. So when I went to Italy, it was very different to when I went to Japan. So when I went to Italy, I could actually already speak Italian because I did it at university, but I couldn't speak, although I did have classical Italian, as I turned out, that I was actually asking for a beer, of going, I wished for a beer, por favor, whatever it is, per favore. And yes, so that's just an aside. But so I've lost my train of thought now. So in Japan, I didn't speak any Japanese. So you are living and working and socializing with the same people all of the time. So which can have its benefits, because you end up working really collegiately, because you become friends with the people that you work with in a very meaningful way. But it also can cause tensions. So, it's about trying to, just as it would if you spend time with too much time with anybody. So it's about that importance of having spaces within the culture that you can go to. For instance, I joined Internations, which is for people living in cultures who come together and just share experiences of Japan and experiences of their own cultures and their own countries. And that was a really good break away from socializing with my work team, which was lovely. But I did find that actually in all of these experiences, I had a really nice work-life balance, which I hadn't yet experienced at that point in England when I was working in English schools. So in terms of, I had lots of time. Time was prioritised for us to work together, because we were a large school. As a 3 form entry school, time was prioritised for us to plan together. So I had Tuesday afternoon and Thursday afternoon, where, because the children had specialist teaching, they were all doing PE on those afternoons. And then I had a planning morning as well with my team. So a lot of my planning, marking and assessment could genuinely happen in PPA time. So in Italy, we were pretty much in the pub by 4 p.m. It wasn't like that in Japan as assistant head. I hadn't, I was there until a lot later, until 8 p.m. sometimes. But I think, that work-life balance, there is a chance to have, a real work-life balance when you're having these experiences. So as Jen said, there were some intercultural challenges in parent expectations. So especially kind of in Japan, there was a certain expectation of different parents from different cultures, especially in Asia, around the expectations of what schools could deliver, and of high expectations of achievement and attainment, rather than socialization. It was very much about qualification. And so there was a drive towards that, and it was very much about communicating with parents and saying, this is the school you've chosen for your child, and these are our values. This is the value. These are the values that we have running through it. And a lot of schools are very good in terms of the leadership will support you to have those conversations. But there were some challenging conversations around just different cultural expectations of education. There were also, and this is mostly from a leadership point of view, but there were some interesting safeguarding and frictions to do with how different cultures view behaviour management at home, and the kind of values that we held at school. And I won't go into too much detail about that, but just, you know, those frictions were there. And so there were some sensitivities culturally and educationally that were really important that we had to tackle with, and quite challenging. And my final challenge from this teaching experience is definitely about getting resources in English. So we did one, especially when I was working in Japan, we had one shipment per year because it all came across on a boat. So we did the biggest YPO order that you can imagine, and had everything shipped over to Japan. But then if you didn't remember to put it in that order, then getting your books, etc., in English was really a challenge. Let's have the next slide, please. Yeah. So of course it's not just about school, it's also about adventure, it's about friendship, it's about culture, it's about languages. So there was lots of, I'm very outdoorsy, so there was lots of climbing of mountains in Italy. So we've got there's some mountains that are just north of Milan, so there, and traveling to the south of Italy to do some climbing, lots of skiing on a weekend, again with colleagues. And I was actually living at the time, I chose not to live in Milan. And that's something about accommodation as well that's interesting to point out, that have a look at the package that we'll talk more about in a moment. Because some schools will ship you over and give you accommodation and choice of where you live. And that was the case in Japan, which was absolutely fantastic, because I turned up bewildered in Tokyo and they took me to my house, gave me the keys, and gave me this beautiful house to live in the centre of Tokyo, which I thought, this is amazing. And in Italy, it was more complicated, but there was choice involved. So they put me up in a hotel for 3 months, and then it was expected, because I could speak Italian, that I would just, you know, with the school's slight help around contracts, that I would find my own accommodation, which was really hard to do. And I decided that I didn't want to live in Milan, so I went to live in Monza, where the Formula One is, and it was really good fun going to the Formula One. And I ended up with a nice apartment, but it was very, very expensive way of doing things. A lot of money up front and loans from the school, and it became a lot more complicated than it probably needed to be. But it is all about that kind of socialization as well. You know, you will meet so many people from different countries that are working in international schools. And you'll just, you know, you might stay friends with them forever. I've got some that I'm friends with now, and others you might just, you know, enjoy being with them and then move on. Okay. And for me, it's definitely about exploration. And when I first went to Italy, I thought, you know, this is something that I'm going to do now, because then I'll go back to England and then I'll teach, and that's when I'll get on with the other stuff of life. And actually you find that life just happens anyway. And I wish someone had told me that at the beginning, and it gives you a different view on life. But stuff happens, you know, you meet someone, and I had my baby in Tokyo. That's my husband showing her Tokyo when she's first born. And it's just like life happens, and part of that international experience is that you get to see life very, very differently. So one of the things that I came across when I'd had Rose was the cultural tradition in Japan that when you go to a cafe, they put out on these large windowsills a cushion. And I didn't know what to do with this cushion. And I was kind of bewildered. And they said, oh, it's for the baby. And, you know, we said, well, what do we do with it, with this newborn baby? And the tradition is that whilst you're having your coffee, that the mum and dad get a break, and you just put your baby on a cushion. And there were lots of babies on a cushion, like lining the windowsill, which was very cute. And she knew exactly what to do with it. She just fell straight asleep. And then there's also, you know, in Japan again, probably because it's so different to England, there was a little man who came every day to talk with a cat, and he would, if the sun was too hot, he would give the cat an umbrella. If it was raining, he would give it an umbrella with a blanket, and they would have a good old conversation. And it's just part of that kind of caring for animals culture that was going on. But it's just, you know, these experiences, and not just experiences of a different way of educating, because a lot of the time it's going to be very similar to what you're already doing, just with different challenges. But it's going to give you a different view on life, that's going to help you to teach better, I think, because you've got all these different kind of perspectives. And the conversations you can have in your classroom when you've got 53 different nationalities in your school and you're studying something that's to do with the world, the different perspectives you can get and the conversations you can draw out of your class are just so rich. It's brilliant.
One of the just on the idea of kind of like a really diverse classroom, I got sent to a couple of conferences while I was working, you know, while I was working abroad in other international schools, and I saw the best display, which was what did you have for breakfast? And then they had a breakfast from every nationality in the school, just to kind of show, because breakfast is so particular to people's countries, isn't it, and homes. And I was like, that is such a fantastic way. Just, you know, we all eat breakfast, but we all do it slightly differently. So, really simple things and then really deep things as well, isn't it? So.
we did a similar thing with tables, that we were doing something in DT and they were modeling a table for some reason, and they were looking at what tables look like in different cultures. So in Japan they're all very low down and people sit on the floor to eat, and then in you know, we were looking at UK tables, we were looking at different traditions around eating. I'm sorry, there's an alarm going off in my kitchen. Do carry on, Jen.
I'll move on then to the next slide. So the next thing to think about then is how to find a school. And as Rue mentioned earlier, TES International is a really good place to start looking for international jobs, because many international schools will use TES International as kind of the first port of call for advertising the roles that are available. Rue, did you want to have a look at the website now?
Yes, yeah, I was just going to flag some things up, really.
Right, let me share the screen. So I'll stop sharing that one. And then I will start sharing that one. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's brilliant. So you'll see when you go on to TES International, and there's lots of things to say about how you actually apply. Let's start with kind of how you look. So this is the prime area, I would say, for reputable schools to advertise the jobs that they have. And by that, I mean that there are some schools that are less rigorous in terms of their curriculum and less focused on education in terms that we would recognise it. So it's very much a matter of, and that's not to say that every school on TES will be a school that you necessarily want to work in, and it's very difficult to check these schools out because you can't go and physically visit them. So it's really important that you do your due diligence around these schools. And one of the ways that you can do that is by looking at, are they part of COBIS? Are they part of another thing called FOBASIA, which is in Council of International Schools? Are they part of a school group that's really recognised? If you look at the website, have they got things about how they support teachers' professional development, etc., etc.? So it's about checking that you're happy with the schools that you're actually applying to. And I personally am happy for anyone like to email me and kind of say, what do you think of this, if you're unsure about any school that you find. So you can see on the bottom of this, you can search by location. So if you've got a particular area that you want to explore or that you want to teach in, then you can do that. You can also search by workplace. So you can look for primary school specific. You can look for early years. You can You can look for special education, you can look for further education, but there aren't many further education specific sites just on places just advertising on here. You can also search by position, and what I found was that my international experiences really boost very quickly your opportunity for leadership. So if you're looking for a middle leadership role, like a subject leader, then, you know, apply internationally using the experience that you have. But also, when you are in your first international experience, you'll probably find that because of the turnover of staff that you get, so we used to have sort of 20 new staff every year in Tokyo roundabouts, there would often be vacancies for leadership roles within that, within the school. So have a look out for those, because it's a really, really positive step to take on these kind of roles when you're in these bigger schools. I know that when I took on the English leadership in Italy, I was then supported by the English lead in secondary as well, which was really, really useful. So you can also search by subject. So if you wanted specifically in early years, or you wanted to focus on history, for example, if you wanted to go down a subject leadership route, then you could go into there. And then you've got the most popular tab, which will like have, you know, teaching in different, you know, teaching in Canada, teaching in Australia, etc. So could we just randomly click on a job? So that
should we see? I don't
work. If you go in workplace and primary, and then if you click down, maybe one that looks pretty much like a standard teaching position.
Elementary art teacher, elementary teacher.
A lot of the American jobs come out. Oh, primary classroom teacher, EYFS, Doha. Oh. So, oh, that's a lovely school, Doha, British school. So you will find when you look on here that you'll have a job overview, and then you'll have the values of the school, the successful applicants must have. So you have to tailor it's really, really important you tailor your application to the school. And then you'll have this package here, what they offer you. So it'll be different in European schools. For example, Spanish schools are very much, they are lower paid, but they often have a package that goes with it that makes it really, really worthwhile. Whereas if you're teaching in Singapore or United Arab Emirates or Asia, the packages are really quite lucrative in terms of you can save a lot of money when you're there. So, and just incidentally, because you don't spend it, because a lot of the time it comes with furnished accommodation and paid utilities. So the house that we were in, it was heavily subsidised. So we paid £300 a month for it. But actually in total, it came to about £3,000 a month for rent. So the school paid the large majority of that. And we paid that £300 plus we paid some utilities, but not all. And if you've got children, you usually get a school fee discount or a completely free place. You'll also get flown over there, so they'll organise your flights, given medical insurance, and they'll usually give you an annual flight to the Asian schools, flight back home, whereas the European schools don't tend to do that. So, and I'm just talking about those two areas of the world because that's what I know. But there'll be a similar package details for every school if you want to teach in the US or Canada or Australia or Falkland Islands, etc., wherever you fancy going. There'll also be some countries specify things like life insurance needs to be there. So anything that's country specific will usually be covered by the school, and they'll organise for your visas as well. So have a look at the packages. And if, for example, you're looking at going to teach in Asia, you need to be looking for, are these things offered? And if they're not, it's kind of asking a question in your mind, okay, why are they not offered? So those, if you're looking in Asia, certainly you would expect accommodation, you would expect the flights and the annual flight home as well. And you'd probably expect medical insurance as well. So things to just look out for in terms of that. And that's all I wanted to show on the website, really.
That's really helpful though as well, like yeah, I've not looked at this for a while because I haven't been looking for international jobs recently, but it's so helpful just to have that reminder and the reminder of the package as well, because like you say, it's a good indicator, isn't it, as to applied to my school. It came with a very similar package. We got the annual flight. They did the medical insurance. Yeah, schools can be really, really supportive with that sort of thing, can't they?
I'm just really aware of the time now, Jenna, and that
Sure.
I have to go at 5. Shall we go to questions, do you think?
Shall we just let me just check I think we've covered everything, haven't we? When to apply, is it maybe worth just talking through when to
Oh yeah,
apply, and then yeah,
yeah,
so
brilliant.
did you, I think you've got the you've got the knowledge here, Roo.
So just really briefly, and this is really, really rough indication, but if you're thinking about this, it would be for 2025. So thinking about September, and a lot of schools actually start advertising as of the September before for an August start. So we've got especially schools in Asia, Indonesia, and leadership positions start looking in September on TES International and for the following August start. And the schools usually start halfway through August because that's when your induction is. So you might in that first year think you've had a really short holiday if you're working in a UK school. So in South America and Australia, the school year actually tends to start either in January or March. So they will also start advertising from September onwards. So just be aware that not everyone has the same September to September school year that we have. In Europe, most jobs are advertised around November and February for the August start. But any time, that there are jobs out there that are on there now, it's just that if you want the pick of the best, that's when to look. And the rest of the world, just keep looking throughout the year. There's loads of different countries that advertise sort of from September through to December, really, like the African nations, the North Americas and the Caribbean.
Brilliant. And then just in terms of how to apply as well, just as we would advise in this country, like tailor your application to the international school, because as we've talked about, there's lots of differences and nuances with an international school that you maybe wouldn't get in the UK. So I think we've mentioned most things there. The extracurricular activities is really important, what you can offer, because extracurricular activities and clubs in international schools tend to have an even higher status than they do in the UK. So if you can bring something specific, if you're musical, if you're artistic, if you're a particular sport or coaching, then that really like sell yourself using that in your application. It's that knowledge of EAL learners, as we've spoken about, is going to be really important, and how to teach children with EAL. And then also kind of thinking about the values of the country that you're going to and the culture that you're excited to become part of. Those are probably the main differences, aren't they, between a UK application and an international school application. So I'm going to stop sharing now. That's everything we've got to say in terms of our experience and how to apply. I'll stop recording. So goodbye to everyone who's been watching the webinar, and then we'll take Q&A as well.